Hey, Gramps, this ain't a museum. You sure you know how to shoot that thing? They all laughed until he rolled up his sleeve. And silence hit harder than any bullet because some tattoos aren't for show, they're warnings. And this one, it shut down the whole range. Before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? What's your story? Drop it in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The late afternoon sun settled gently over the pines of Ash Ridge, Arkansas. It was a quiet Saturday in early spring, and the gravel lot outside Copper Ridge shooting range was filling up faster than usual. Inside, the usual mix of weekend regulars were setting up, checking scopes, adjusting earmuffs. But something was different this time, something louder, sharper. A group had arrived in a rented black SUV, all smiles and swagger, 6 young professionals from Little Rock, fresh off their third team building retreat. They wore matching tactical vests, branded ear protection, and sunglasses that never left their faces even indoors. They were loud, confident, and clearly here to impress. I watched from behind the front desk, wiping down safety glasses that had just come out of the sterilizer. As one of the junior employees, it wasn't my job to interfere, just observe, stock, and clean. Then I saw him, lane 5, right on schedule. Frank Halstead, 84 years old, moved like he had all the time in the world. He parked his old Chevy truck in the back row, just like always, and took his time walking up. In his hand was the same worn leather range bag he'd carried for years, dark brown, scuffed, patched with black tape near the zipper. Frank never said much. He'd nod at the front desk, pay cash, and take lane 5 without asking. He always brought the same rifle, a well-kept M14 that looked like it had seen more years than most of us combined. Some thought he came for nostalgia, but Frank never talked about the old days. He just came, loaded, shot, packed up, every Saturday, rain or shine. That day, the younger group was already set up at the premium lanes. They had ARs with customized rails, red dot sights, and all the accessories Instagram could recommend. They laughed as they pulled out ammo boxes marked high velocity, debating over muzzle brakes and tactical gloves. One of them had a GoPro strapped to his chest. Another was live streaming to someone's group chat. Frank didn't look their way. He just walked past them and nodded at Mr. Donnelly, the range officer, before heading to lane 5. Then it started. Not mean at first, just smug. Hey, museum day at the range, one of the guys called out, elbowing his buddy. Careful. Gramps, that thing might blow dust instead of bullets. Frank didn't flinch. He placed his range bag down with careful hands, like he always did. One of the women in the group, Emily, I think, chuckled. Is he using iron sights? No way. Another leaned over, whispering louder than he meant to. Bet he brought that from a war museum. The others laughed. To them, it was just harmless teasing. But to me, it felt like something else, something colder. Frank unzipped his bag slowly, laying out his gear with a calm rhythm. No wasted motion, no rush. He pulled out his shooting mat, ammo box, small toolkit, everything placed just so. Deliberate, quiet. I'd seen that same setup every week for over a year, but somehow it always looked like a ritual. Mr. Donnelly stepped over, hands on his belt. He'd been an Army sergeant once, and though he didn't talk much either, he'd always had a certain respect for Frank. Mr. Halstead, Donnelly said, leaning down gently. We've got a full house today. Those guys rented out the premium lanes. You sure lane 5's okay? Frank looked up, nodded once. Don't need more than that. Donnelly nodded back. Then, as he turned, one of the young guys called out again. Hey, Gramps, you lost beginner's class is on the far end. More laughter. Frank said nothing, just opened a cloth pouch and began checking the bolt of his M14. His hands moved like clockwork. Steady, quiet, familiar. Someone else added. Think he remembers how to shoot that thing. We should get him a walker with bipod legs. This time, Donnelly's face tensed, but Frank raised a hand, slightly, barely a gesture, and continued working. I remember feeling a strange heaviness in the air, like something was shifting, but no one else had noticed yet. Frank finished his setup, placed 3 rounds into a simple wooden holder, adjusted his posture, then leaned back for a moment. Outside, the spring breeze picked up, the sun dipped lower, streaking the gravel with long golden shadows. Inside, the heat began building. Tactical gear doesn't breathe well, and I could already see the group sweating beneath their matching vests. Frank still wore his long-sleeved shirt, sleeves buttoned tight, didn't seem to mind the warmth at all. One of the younger guys, Tyler, took off his vest and fanned himself dramatically. Geez, it's like an oven in here. Old man's gonna melt. That was when it happened. Frank quietly unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. Then, without a word, he pulled off his shirt and folded it neatly. At first, no one reacted. Then someone saw it, a faded tattoo on his left forearm. Dark ink, once black, now almost silver under the lights. A snake coiled tightly around a dagger. Below it, the words, macv-sog, Laos, Sector 5. 1968. The room changed. One of the guys froze mid-laugh. Another lowered his rifle slowly, staring. Emily took off her ear protection, blinking. Wait, she whispered. That's real. No one said a word. Donnelly looked over. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His eyes stayed locked on the tattoo. I remember a long silence, the kind that doesn't ask for attention but demands it anyway. Frank didn't explain it, didn't offer a story, didn't look around for a reaction. He just loaded a magazine, 1 round at a time, and for the first time since they walked in, the group was quiet. They didn't know yet. Not really. But somehow, they understood they had just misjudged the wrong man, and Lane 5 didn't belong to them anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, almost physical. Frank didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. He continued laying out his ammunition. 3 rows of carefully aligned rounds, each one placed with the steadiness of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. The others watched from a distance now. The laughter had stopped. The smirks were gone. Tyler stood with his phone in hand, thumb frozen above the screen. He just Googled 3 words, macv-sog tattoo. His eyes darted down, then widened fast. Guys, he whispered, barely audible. This is real. He turned the screen to the others, but they were already staring at Frank. The faded ink wasn't flashy, no bold outlines, no color, but it meant something most people couldn't begin to understand. Not unless they'd been there, or knew someone who had. The dagger and snake curled like it had grown into Frank's skin. Beneath it, the words, macv-sog, Laos, Sector 5, 1968. To the untrained eye, it was just an old tattoo. But to anyone who'd served or studied military history, it meant ghosts, missions. Silence. Donnelly, the range officer, took 1 step forward. He didn't salute, didn't interrupt, just stood still. He'd heard of those men, the ones who walked behind enemy lines where maps ended, the ones no one talked about, but he'd never met one, until now. Frank adjusted his stance, raised his rifle. The M14 looked ancient next to the sleek carbines on the next lanes, but when it sat in Frank's hands, it looked right. He checked the iron sights, stepped into position, then he paused, not dramatically, just patiently. He took a breath, then another, and then 3 shots, not rushed, not showy, just precise, deliberate. 3 holes appeared on the target 50 yards away, not close to each other, on top of each other. The paper tore clean, no hesitation in the spacing, just 1 hole growing deeper with each round. No one else fired. No one even breathed. Frank lowered his rifle, exhaled slowly, and stepped back. He picked up a rag, wiped his hands and reached for a small thermos from his bag. For a moment, the range was still, then a voice broke the silence. "Sir," one of the young men said quietly, I... I didn't know. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Frank looked over, his eyes calm, lined with age, weathered by time, but sharp. "You couldn't have known," he said simply. "Most people don't." And that was all. No lecture, no anger, just a quiet statement of fact. A truth shaped by years most of us couldn't begin to carry. Frank took a sip from his thermos, then sat down on the bench behind his lane, wiping his brow with a hand towel. I found myself watching more than usual. Not because he'd done anything flashy, but because he hadn't. He didn't need to. That tattoo said more than words ever could. And in that moment, I remembered something Donnelly once told me. Weeks ago, over coffee, he'd been talking about Frank. Said, "You know, the old guy lane 5 never says much. But I'd bet my pension he's seen more war than all of us combined." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Now, I wasn't so sure. Frank Halstead wasn't a loud man. He never bragged, never told war stories. After Vietnam, he'd returned home to Arkansas, bought a small wooden house just outside Ash Ridge, worked as a machinist in town. Every morning, he woke at 5:00 at the made his own coffee, read the paper, the kind that still left ink on your fingers. He had no kids, no family nearby. He lived simply, no internet, no television, just a radio and the sound of the woods at night. He didn't talk about the war, not to his neighbors, not to his co-workers, not even to the few women he dated over the years. It wasn't shame. It was something deeper. He carried those memories the way some people carry old scars quietly. But he kept up his routine. Every Saturday, same truck, same bag, same lane. Not for nostalgia, for discipline. Because some skills, they fade if you let them. And some reflexes you don't want to lose. No matter how many years pass. Back at the range, the group was still stunned. They stood off to the side, watching him from a respectful distance now. No more jokes. No more comments about antique rifles or senior discounts. One guy, Connor, I think, stepped forward hesitantly. His voice was different now. Lower. Measured. "My uncle was 101st. Said so ye guys were ghosts." Frank nodded. "Slow. They were. Some still are." Then he looked back at his rifle, checked the chamber, ejected a round with practiced ease. The group began to whisper again. But it wasn't mocking anymore. It was reverent, curious. Someone leaned over to Tyler. "Dude, what was that thing again, Mac?" What Tyler didn't answer right away. His phone still open, now showing a Wikipedia page. His eyes had barely moved. "macv-sog," he muttered. "Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group." Then he blinked, except it wasn't about studies or observations. The others leaned in. "What was it then?" Tyler swallowed. "They went into Laos and Cambodia, behind enemy lines, prisoner extractions, sabotage, stuff that officially never happened." Someone else read over his shoulder. 80% casualty rate. That can't be real. But it was. And suddenly, the weight of that tattoo, the silence around it made sense. One of the younger women looked up, voice barely a whisper. That man survived all of it. No one answered, because no one knew what he truly survived. Only Frank did. And he wasn't telling. Not today. Not ever. Frank stood again. He didn't rush. He picked up the M14 and ran his hand over the stock, the way someone might check a tool before shaping steel. He stepped into position, planting his boots on the familiar rubber mat of lane 5. Back straight, eyes calm. The group behind him was silent now. Not because they were told to be, but because something about the air had changed. Frank loaded 3 rounds into the magazine. The click of metal on metal echoed across the range like a bell. He didn't glance at the others, didn't adjust his stance for effect. He simply raised the rifle, steady, smooth. The old man and the M14 moved as one, not like a shooter and a weapon, but like two parts of a memory still alive. He exhaled, then bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, each perfectly timed, spaced like a heartbeat. The paper target 50 yards out didn't flutter, but it changed. 3 holes, not beside each other, on top of each other. A single tear in the center, clean, deep, dead center. Someone behind me whispered, "No way," but nobody laughed this time. Even Donnelly, the range officer, took a step back. I could see something behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or just awe. Frank lowered the rifle with the same calm he'd lifted it. Then he set it down gently, almost reverently, and stepped away. He sat back down, unscrewed the cap on his thermos, took a slow sip, like nothing had happened. For a full 30 seconds, the range stayed quiet. Then the spell began to break slowly, carefully. Tyler, the one who'd laughed the loudest before, stepped forward, hands visible, shoulders low. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked young, sir, he said, voice unsure. "I want to apologize. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Frank didn't answer right away, just studied him, calm and clear. Then he gave a small nod. "You couldn't have known," he said. "Most people don't." Connor, the taller guy with the GoPro, had taken it off. He wasn't filming anymore. He pulled out his phone and dialed. I could hear the voice on the other end, older, distant. "Dad," he said, "I'm at this range in Ash Ridge. There's this guy. He's got a macv-sog tattoo. You ever hear of that?" There was a pause. Then the voice came through the speaker. "Son," the man said quietly, "you show that man respect. Those were the guys who went into hell, so the rest of us didn't have to." Connor froze, then slowly lowered the phone. Nobody spoke for a while. Nobody dared. Then, movement near the wall. A man maybe in his 60s walked forward from the observation area. He had graying hair, a 1st Cavalry Division patch on his ball cap. He didn't hesitate, walked straight up to Frank, then stood at attention, and saluted. Frank looked up slowly, returned the salute half-inch, exact, no wasted motion. "I was 69 to 70, the man said. "Cambodia border." Frank gave a slight nod. "Then you know," the man exhaled, like he'd been holding something for a long time. "Not like you do, sir," he said. "Not like you." Another voice, quieter, came from the younger crowd. Emily, who hadn't spoken since the laughter died down. She looked at Frank, then said softly, "That wasn't luck, was it?" Frank smiled faintly. "No," he said, "it was practice and remembering what mattered." She nodded, didn't press further. The group stood still, weapons untouched, ammunition forgotten. They weren't there to shoot anymore. They were there to witness. Frank placed his empty thermos back in the bag. He pulled out a cleaning cloth and began wiping down the M14, slow and steady. Every motion was familiar, like muscle memory that never faded. Donnelly approached again, but this time with purpose. He looked Frank straight in the eye. "Sir," he said, voice carrying weight now, "you want this range to yourself for the rest of the day? It's yours." No one would object. Frank shook his head. "No need. Just respect the range." That was it. Simple. Clear. Because that's all he ever asked for. Not fame, not a crowd. Just respect. Donnelly turned to the rest of us. "Everyone off the lanes," he said. "Give the man the space. We're not qualified to share it." No one resisted. No one argued. They just stepped back. Watched. Even Tyler, who'd mocked Frank earlier, removed his tactical gloves and set them on the bench. like even holding a weapon now felt undeserved. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room but in all of us. The range didn't feel like a place for games anymore. It felt like something sacred. Frank finished cleaning the M14 and set it in its case. Then he closed the lid and latched it with care. He stood, stretched slightly, and looked around. Not with judgment, not even pride, just clarity, like he could see all of them young, unsure, and now changed. He didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. As he walked toward the exit, Connor raised his hand slightly. "Sir," he said again. "Thank you." Frank paused, turned halfway, for what he asked gently. Connor didn't have an answer. He just shrugged, eyes damp, for still being here. Frank gave a soft nod, then walked through the doorway and into the fading light. Frank stepped out into the afternoon light, rifle bag over one shoulder, thermos in hand. The air had cooled just slightly, as if the day itself had exhaled. Gravel crunched beneath his boots as he made his way to the old Chevy. No one followed. No one called after him. Inside the range, the silence hadn't lifted. It stayed like a mist thick with realization. Donnelly stood near the lanes, arms crossed, watching the door slowly close behind Frank. Then he looked at the others, the group that had arrived so full of noise. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "From now on," he said, "Lane 5 belongs to him permanently." A pause. No one else touches it. No one argued. They just nodded, one by one. The same way soldiers do when orders make sense without explanation. Tyler took a seat on the bench he'd mocked earlier. He didn't say much, just stared at the target Frank had left behind. Still up there, still perfect. 3 rounds. 1 hole. Connor slid his phone back into his pocket, his earlier bravado long gone. "I thought I came here to show off," he muttered, mostly to himself. "I didn't know I was coming here to be taught something." No one laughed. A few minutes later, the group started packing up, slower than they had when they arrived. No high fives, no loud stories, just quiet gestures. And a shared look between them that said, "We'll remember this." Emily lingered behind. She placed her hand gently on the lane divider Frank had stood beside. Then she whispered something I didn't quite catch, but it felt like a thank you. An hour later, after the range had closed, Donnelly sat at his desk in the back room. He opened an old folder labeled Veteran Incident Reports, not the kind for complaints, but the kind that reminded staff what real service looked like. He added a single note: Frank Halstead, macv-sog, full respect, no exceptions. Meanwhile, back in town, Frank drove the winding road home, the same road he'd driven every Saturday since 1980. The Chevy rumbled over cracks and branches, its old engine grumbling like an old friend. But it held steady, just like him. His house sat near the tree line, tucked beneath a canopy of pine, wooden siding, shingle roof, no security system, no lawn ornaments. Just a porch with 1 chair and a faded American flag gently swaying in the breeze. He parked, grabbed his gear, and walked up the steps. Inside, the home was quiet. No television, no computer, just a small bookshelf, a dining table for one, and a radio sitting by the window. He placed his rifle bag in the corner cabinet, locked it, turned the key once, then he sat, turned the radio dial until the static cleared. Soft jazz played, something from the 60s. Frank leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to listen. No medals lined the wall. No shadow boxes, no photos. The only picture frame sat near the window, faded and worn. A group of men, young and serious, standing in jungle fatigues, their eyes sharp and unsmiling. Frank was in the center, younger, thinner, but still him. Below the photo, a handwritten label, Laos, Sector 5, 1968. He didn't stare at it. He didn't need to. He just turned back to the light coming through the window. the golden streaks hitting the wooden floor like memories that didn't ask to be spoken. Back at the range, Tyler sat in his car with the engine off. His hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Then he reached for his phone, opened a popular gun forum he'd been active on for years. He typed "Meta Ghost today," didn't say more than 10 words, but he shut us all up. He hit post, then set the phone down and stared out the windshield for a while. The post went viral by midnight. A grainy photo someone had taken Frank's back, the tattoo visible as he lined up for that final shot. The comments poured in. My grandfather served with SOG. He never talked about it either. Those were the real ones, the silent ones. That tattoo means he's the reason we get to joke around today. People began asking, who was he? Does anyone know his name? But most agreed it didn't matter. Because the story wasn't about identity. It was about presence, about dignity, about a man who didn't demand respect. He just carried it. And when people finally saw it, they fell quiet. The next Saturday, Lane 5 sat empty until 10 Urzura. Mem. Then Frank walked in, just as he always had. Same truck, same bag. Donnelly gave him a nod from the counter. No words needed. Everyone else moved aside, without being asked. And for the first time in that small Arkansas range, people weren't there just to shoot. They were there to remember. And to watch a quiet man pick up where he left off? No applause, no spotlight. Just the steady rhythm of bolts locking, cloths wiping steel, and a man doing what he'd always done. Not for glory, not for praise, but because some things are worth keeping sharp. Frank never said much, and never needed to, because sometimes silence, in the hands of the right man, says everything.